Sylvie Grady was 18 years old. She had $173.40 to her name. And for 12 years, she had believed something that was not true. She believed her grandmother had paid for those rooms. Once a month, 12 years running, the two of them rode a night bus 400 miles so they could sit across a molded plastic table from her mother for 2 hours. And the night before, they slept at a 9-room motel across the road from the prison gate. Sylvie remembered the smell of the soap there. She remembered the swamp cooler running inside the wall. She never once knew that her grandmother had not paid a cent. Marva Grady died on a windless morning in March, sitting in the armchair by the window with an unopened newspaper in her lap. 77 years old, her heart simply quit, and it made so little noise that the house never woke. Sylvie found her at 5:30 coming off shift, the sleeves of her nursing home uniform still smelling of disinfectant. She stood in the kitchen doorway a long time and did not turn on the light. There are moments when a person knows exactly where her life has broken in half. The house was a rental, and the name on the lease belonged to Aunt Doreen, her mother's younger sister, who lived 2 towns over and came by 3 times a year. Doreen arrived on the second day after the funeral with 2 men and a borrowed truck. She was not cruel. She was simply the kind of person who believes the truth should be said fast and gotten over with, the way you rip a bandage off skin. She said she could not carry the rent alone, that she had already told the landlord they would be out by the end of the month, and that Sylvie was 18 now, so legally it was all much simpler. She said the word legally as if it were a warm blanket. Then she asked if Sylvie needed a ride to the bus station. Sylvie packed her life into a canvas duffel and 1 cardboard box. 3 notebooks of small, careful handwriting, a towel, some clothes, a battery alarm clock, and a cookie tin with the things nobody had bothered to fight over. Plastic reading glasses, a Bible with the spine mended in electrical tape, a stack of bus ticket stubs held with a rubber band, thick as a finger, 1 stub for every trip. She sat in the Hollis Flat bus station most of that afternoon and counted her money 3 times. $173.40, and that was what was left after she paid her share to the funeral home, a share nobody had asked her for. But she paid it because her grandmother had raised her since she was 6, and a person does not leave this world with a bill still hanging. At 18, you are generally told the world opens up. Sylvie's had just closed another notch. Her mother, Lynette Grady, was in her 12th year of a 15-year sentence at a prison called the Callaway Unit, out in Cotton Country in Mesquite Scrub in West Texas, 409 miles from that bench. Sylvie was 6 when her mother went in, and she remembered her the way a person remembers a song when she only knows the chorus. Cold hands, bitten fingernails, a woman who laughed with her shoulders and not just her mouth. Everything else she had learned across a beige plastic table under fluorescent light that never went off, in a room that smelled of vending machine popcorn and floor bleach. 141 trips over 12 years, counting the ones turned back for weather or lockdown, and her grandmother never missed a month. She said only one thing about it, and only once, the night Sylvie turned 11 and asked why she had to go when the other girls got to go to summer camp. She said, "Child, if the chair on this side of the table is empty one time, the person on the other side starts believing it will be empty forever." The night bus left at 9 and reached the Thule Crossroads at 4:40 in the morning. Sylvie knew that number the way people know their own birthday. The brakes hissed, the door folded open, and the cold that sits on the Texas high plains before dawn came in like water. And always, without fail, on the far side of the road, there was a yellow light burning under the eave of a low row of rooms, and a woman standing under it with both hands in the pockets of a man's coat. Sylvie never asked her name, because children do not ask grown people their names. Her grandmother called her Miss Hazel. Miss Hazel called Sylvie Little Bird, because the first time she came, at 6 years old, she had fallen asleep on her grandmother's shoulder with both hands curled up tight as claws. 3 years ago, the bus still stopped at that crossroads, but there was nobody standing under the light anymore. And the two of them started sleeping at a motor lodge. 11 miles out at $39 a night, and her grandmother started skipping supper in the months when the bills stacked up. Sylvie asked once where Miss Hazel had gone. Her grandmother said only, "She passed, honey," in the voice of a woman who has lost the one thing holding her up and does not want a child to know it. She slept 3 nights on a friend's couch, one night in that friend's car because the friend's father came home early. And on the fifth night, she understood that other people's kindness has a floor to it and that the floor is nobody's fault. She walked to the public library and started looking for work that came with somewhere to sleep. Restaurants with a room over the kitchen. Feedlots that needed pens cleaned. She found nothing. But on the green felt board by the door, between a flyer for puppies and an ad for a dance class, there was a sheet of yellow paper in that flat courthouse type every county in this country uses. Tax delinquent properties to be offered at public auction on the steps of the Rell County Courthouse this coming Saturday. Sold as is, buyer responsible for inspection. Sylvie read it because she read everything. Her grandmother had taught her that the fine print is where people hide the truth, and that a poor person who does not read it loses more than money. 32 acres of Milo ground. A mobile home with no frame under it. An abandoned church. And on the 14th line, a name that had been sleeping inside her for 12 years. Bluebonnet Court, 9 units and an office on an acre and a quarter, FM 118, town of Thule. Improvements rated poor to failing. Assessed value of improvements, $0. And in the column for the opening bid, a number so small she read across twice to be sure she had not slipped a line. $23. $23 was the cost of running the legal notice. She spent 2 hours at that terminal until she understood the mechanism, and the mechanism was merciless, but it was not mysterious. When a landowner dies without heirs, the property tax keeps growing the way grass keeps growing. The county mails notices and nobody answers. After a few years, the county files suit. A judge orders the property sold to recover what is owed, and the opening bid is set at the debt or the cost of the process, whichever is lower once the thing has been assessed at nothing. There was one more piece, and she wrote it into her notebook in small, even handwriting. In Texas, after a tax sale, the former owner or a lawful heir still has a window to redeem the property by paying the buyer back, plus a penalty fixed by statute. And on property that is nobody's homestead and not agricultural, that window is 180 days, which meant a buyer holds the place for half a year without truly having it. Which meant that somebody could step out of nowhere and take it back. She thought about that and found she was not afraid of it, because to a person with nothing, 6 months under a roof is still 6 months under a roof. Saturday morning she took the earliest westbound. The ticket cost $29. The sale was held on the east steps of the courthouse, because the law says so, and because it has always been held there. And maybe 20 people came, mostly men in seed caps from the fertilizer dealerships, 2 women with clipboards from a land company out of Lubbock, an insurance agent smoking by a lamppost. The deputy running it had a voice like gravel and read the lots the way a man reads a prayer he has read too often. The Milo ground went for $11,000. The mobile home went for $200. The church drew no bid at all. Then he came to lot 14. Next up is the old Bluebonnet Court out on FM 118, he read. 9 units and an office. Improvements rated poor to failing, sold as is, opening bid $23. And then he added, off the page, in the voice of a man who has stood on those steps too many years, I will tell you honestly, folks, that place is worth what the tin on the roof weighs. There was laughter, not mean laughter, the laughter of people who have all heard the same joke for 20 years. A man in a cap called out, "Does the ghost come with it?" And the laughter got bigger, and the woman with the clipboard did not even look up. Sylvie put her hand in the air and heard her own voice say $23, and heard it the way a person hears somebody else. 20 faces turned at once. She was 18, hair pulled back, wearing the nursing home uniform jacket because it was the warmest coat she owned, a canvas duffel and a cardboard box at her feet. The deputy squinted and asked if she knew what she was bidding on, young lady, and she said, I slept there 41 nights. That sentence made the courthouse steps go quiet in a way she had not expected. Later she would understand why. In a county with a prison in it, everybody knows who sleeps at the Bluebonnet Court, and nobody says it out loud. He called it twice, looked around one more time almost as if hoping somebody would rescue her, and brought the gavel down. The county clerk was a woman named Marlene Duckworth with reading glasses on a chain, and she slid across a thin folder, a receipt, and a ring of 9 brass keys, each wearing a yellowed plastic fob cut in the shape of a flower. I have to tell you a few things and then you can do what you like, she said. The power was cut 3 years ago. The county shut the water at the road. You have 180 days of redemption under the statute. So, if a lawful heir turns up, you lose it and you get your money back, and that is all. And I will say this last part as a person and not as the clerk. There has been a company asking about that frontage on 118 for 2 years. Sylvie asked which company, and Marlene Duckworth looked at her a moment and said, "They will come to you. That kind always comes to you." The bus out to Thule took 50 minutes and crossed country so flat the horizon looked like a drawn thread. Cotton stubble in cut rows, dirt red as fired brick, low mesquite and thorny clumps along the fence lines, and the dry, steady April wind that puts fine grit in your teeth. Thule came up around a bend, a 2-pump gas station, a grocery that was also the post office, a small tin-roofed church called Crossroads Chapel, a cattle scale. The sign said population 611, and Sylvie guessed that number had been wrong for a long time. Then at the north edge the road ran out into open ground, and on the left stood the concrete wall and the razor wire of the Callaway unit. And on the right, almost exactly opposite the main gate, stood the Bluebonnet Court. The driver let her off at the crossroads, looked at the duffel and the box and said, "This is not a place to stand around after dark, sweetheart." Sylvie said, "I am not standing, I live here." The bus pulled away and the dust settled, and for the first time in 12 years she was looking at that place in daylight. It was so much smaller than it was in her memory. That always happens when you come back to somewhere from childhood. But this time there was something on top of it. At night, under the yellow light, this place had been a shore. In daylight it was a body. 9 units of cinder block whitewashed, once and on the color of weak tea. The metal roof had lost 3 panels off the north gable, and curled at the edge like the corner of a wet page. The concrete walkway roof ran the length of the rooms, cracked across and lengthwise, buffalo grass shoving up through the seams. The door of Unit 4 hung off its bottom hinge. The office window was broken and somebody had covered it with plywood, and in the plywood were 3 round holes she guessed came from a pellet gun. Out at the road edge stood the sign, 13 feet tall, cut in the shape of a 5-petal bluebonnet. The blue bleached off entirely down to gray primer, with rust running from the bolt heads, and under the flower, a smaller sign on 2 chains that could still be read. Vacancy. At the corner of the weedy lot stood an aluminum payphone booth, with the glass gone and the body rusted until its edges ran together, the handset still on the hook. Sylvie put the box down and looked at all of it a long while. The wind pulled a loose panel of tin and made it groan. Somewhere behind the wall across the road, a loudspeaker said something garbled and stopped. She thought, "I just spent $23 on a corpse." Then she picked the box back up and walked toward the office, because she had nowhere else to walk. And because underneath everything, the wind here still smelled exactly the way she remembered. The office key was the biggest on the ring, and the lock had grit in it, and she had to spit on it before it turned. 3 years of dead air fell against her face, dust and paper rotten lime. Inside was smaller than a bedroom. A plywood counter chest high-topped in butter yellow laminate, a wooden board behind it with 9 little cubbies for keys, each with a number painted by hand. A split vinyl chair. A mini refrigerator unplugged, its door propped slightly open to keep the mold out, and Sylvie understood right away what that detail meant. You only prop the refrigerator door when you mean to leave the place to somebody else. On the wall behind the counter hung a felt pinboard, and pinned to it in even rows, with red-headed tacks, were 24 bus timetables, the folded kind the carriers hand out free, 1 for each year, the oldest gone tea-brown. On every one of them a single line had been circled in blue ballpoint, and gone over so many times the paper had worn through. Route 47, departs 2100, arrives Thule Crossroads 4:40. Sylvie stood with her finger on that ring of ink and felt something very small and very old open in her chest. She walked all 9 rooms that afternoon and wrote the condition of each into her notebook like an inventory clerk, because that was the only way she knew to keep from panicking. Ceilings through, floors rotted, mold from the baseboard to hip height in Unit 8, wasps under the eave of 3. 8 rooms were exactly what she had paid $23 for. Then there was Unit 9. The key turned smooth as butter, and that was the first thing that stopped her, because the 8 locks before it had all fought her. She pushed the door, and the air that came out was dry and warm, and did not smell of dust. Unit 9 was clean. Not clean like somebody had swept. Clean like somebody had just finished making it up for a guest. The iron bed against the east wall was made, with the sheet pulled so tight you could snap a finger off it. The blanket folded back in a straight line across the chest of the bed, 2 pillows stacked and plumped. On the nightstand, a drinking glass sat upside down on a paper coaster. The curtains were tied back with cloth ties. Sylvie stood in the doorway and did not go in. She ran a finger over the nightstand and there was dust, but it was a few weeks of dust and not 3 years of it. She looked at the concrete floor and saw her own footprints clear in the fine grit blown under the door. And she saw softer marks that were older than hers, but not much older. She stepped back out, locked it, and stood on the walkway, with all 9 keys squeezed in her fist until the plastic fobs printed themselves into her palm. Sylvie Grady did not believe in ghosts. Her grandmother had been practical almost to the point of harshness, and had taught her that everything in this world has a cause, and that if you have not found the cause yet, it only means you have not looked long enough. But standing there at 4 in the afternoon in the wind, in front of a door that had recently been made up, in a row of buildings dead 3 years, she had to admit this particular cause was hiding very well. She spent that first night in Unit 2, because it was the driest room whose door still locked. She wiped the bed frame with a wet rag, spread her own blanket over the hard foam mattress, ate half a sandwich from the grocery. Dark came fast and thorough. There were no streetlights out here, except the 2 high lamps throwing down onto the prison lot across the road, and their light came through the curtain as a cold white bar lying across the ceiling. A little before midnight she heard footsteps on the concrete outside. Slow, not trying to be quiet, but light. They came down from the north end, past her door, and stopped at the far end of the row. She stood behind the door with the flashlight and counted to 30, and nothing else came, and she opened the door a crack. The walkway was empty. The lot was empty. But at the end of the row, in the spill of light from across the road, something was sitting. It was a dog. Big, short-coated, gray-flecked like ash scattered over white, one ear folded permanently over, sitting in front of the door of Unit 9 with its back to her and its nose pointed at the wood. Sylvie called out softly, "Hey!" The dog did not turn. She called louder and knocked on the doorframe, and there was not a twitch, not an ear, and the stillness of it put a cold hand on the back of her neck. She stepped out onto the walkway, and when she was 3 steps away, the dog turned its head, unhurried, not startled, and looked at her with amber eyes that were perfectly calm. It did not bark, it did not growl, it did not back off. It looked at her a moment, then looked back at the door, then looked at her again, and the gesture was so plain that Sylvie laughed one dry note out loud in the dark. It was showing her. She said, "I do not have a key for you," and heard her own voice break in the middle of it. And the dog lay down, put its chin on its forepaws, and faced the door. The next morning she woke at 5:15 from cold and hunger, went out behind the shed, and coming back across the weeds, she stopped dead. The porch light over Unit 9 was burning. An old round bulb, amber, hanging in a cone-shaped aluminum shade, burning steady, no flicker, throwing a circle of light about 6 feet across onto cracked concrete, with the gray dog lying in the middle of it. Sylvie ran into the office and dug out the utility notice. Date of disconnection, 3 years and 2 months back. She ran around behind the building and found the meter socket, and the meter had been pulled. And there was nothing there but the round empty can with a plastic cover on it and the intact wire seal of the electric company. There was no power. There could not be power, and the light was burning. She stood and watched it for 40 minutes, and at 5:21 it snapped off, neat, as if somebody had thrown a switch. She took out her notebook and wrote the first line of a list that would get longer. Porch light, Unit 9, off at 5:21. Check tomorrow what time it comes on. She did not know yet that the answer would be 4:40. The first person to come to the Bluebonnet Court after Sylvie bought it drove an old pickup that had once been navy blue and had faded to the color of a duck egg. He arrived around 9, parked out on the shoulder instead of pulling into the lot, and sat in the cab a good 2 minutes before he opened the door. Tall, a little bent in the back, plaid shirt tucked in, green ball cap with the embroidery worn off. 71 years old, she would learn later. 3 fingers on his right hand were thickened at the middle joint in exactly the way the hand of a man who has held a steering wheel for 40 years gets thickened. He did not say hello. He looked at the tin roof, looked at the Bluebonnet sign, then looked at her and said, I heard down at the cafe somebody bought this place for $23. Sylvie said, yes, sir. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he has had bad news confirmed, and asked, do you know what it is you bought? Sylvie said, I know who used to stand under that light at 4:40 in the morning. The old man stood still. The wind went through between them and carried grit. Then he took off his cap and held it in both hands in front of his belt buckle, and Sylvie understood she had accidentally said the right password to a society she had not known she belonged to. His name was Coy Whitaker. He had driven Route 47 for 38 years, from the city terminal out to the Thule Crossroads, and past 4 other prisons strung along that line, 4 runs a week, until his eyes stopped being good enough for night driving. He had retired 4 years ago and still woke at 3 in the morning, because his body would not learn a new habit. He said, I carried your grandmother out here 141 times. Sylvie asked how he knew it was her grandmother, and he said, because you tip your head the same way she did when somebody is talking. And because on my line, nobody rides that regular unless they have got somebody on the inside. He was the first person to say the old owner's name to her face. Hazel Bramlett. 79 when she died. No husband living, no children living, nobody anybody knew of. She died in the county hospital on an afternoon in September after 11 days with pneumonia, and there were 7 people at her funeral, and 3 of them were people nobody in town could identify. I was one of the 7, Coy said. I carried a corner of her. Sylvie asked him about the light. The old man laughed, and the laugh took 10 years off him. Ah, he said, that. The whole county calls this place the motel that never sleeps. High school kids dare each other to run up and touch the door of number 9 and run back. There is a preacher 1 county over who put a whole sermon on it. Then he asked, do you want the truth, or do you like the story better? And Sylvie said, I want the truth. He walked her around behind the building to a tin shed half the size of a room with the door wired shut. Inside, among coils of pipe and a lawnmower in pieces, a wooden shelf was bolted to the wall, and on the shelf sat a black box the size of a car battery but heavier, with 2 copper posts greased red, a small plastic case with a green light blinking slow, a squat gray box with a switch, and a round clock face marked out in 24 hours with dozens of small red plastic pins pushed into the rim. He pointed at the roof of the shed, where a solar panel about the size of a tea tray sat tilted to the south, the glass filmed over with red dust but whole. She bought this rig at a farm supply store in Lubbock, Coy said. I do not recall what summer. Cost her a bit over $200. I drove her to get it, and she made me stand there while she asked that kid behind the counter for 45 minutes. Then he explained it slowly, the way a man explains who has had to fix everything he ever owned. The panel charges the battery all day. The battery is a deep cycle marine type, made to be run down and brought back, not a car battery. The plastic case with the green light is the charge controller, and it cuts off when the battery is full so the battery does not cook itself off. The gray box is a small inverter that turns the 12 volts into ordinary house current, because the timer is an ordinary house timer. And the round clock is mechanical, no programming, no screen. You simply push those little red pins into the rim across whatever hours you want current. And the face turns once every 24 hours. Sylvie looked at the row of red pins, and Coy put a calloused finger at each end of the arc. 440, 520. She only wired 2 bulbs to it, he said. The porch light over 9 and the little lamp on the office sign. Nothing else. She figured exactly what that battery could carry every day without dying. Sylvie asked why 440, and Coy Whitaker looked out at the road, at the crossroads, at the place where he had stopped his bus for 38 years. Because that is when my bus got here, he said. And because women and children stepping off a bus at a crossroads in the middle of open country at 4:40 in the morning need to be able to see that there is a light on in some direction. He was quiet a moment, and then he said, she put that in the year she turned 68. I asked her what she was spending the money for, just flip the switch like everybody else. She said, Coy, I am not going to live forever, and your bus is going to keep running. Sylvie had to turn her face away. Hazel Bramlett had spent $200 and some in one afternoon at a farm supply counter to make certain that after she was dead there would still be a light burning 40 minutes every morning for people getting off a bus she would never see again. That is not a ghost, that is a woman who did her arithmetic. The gray dog was lying out in the sun about 10 steps off. Oh, Coy said, and this one, this is Tuesday. Sylvie said that was a strange name, and he said, Tuesday is the day Hazel pulled her out of the bar ditch with her back leg run over. Also Tuesday and Saturday are the 2 visitation days at Callaway. She said everything at this place ought to be named after a day when people get to see each other. Sylvie said she does not bark. All last night she never made a sound, and I called her and she never turned around. Coy Whitaker slapped his thigh and put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled, hard and shrill, directly behind the dog. The dog did not move a hair. She has been deaf since she was a pup, he said. That merle coloring throws deafness sometimes. The inner ear never comes in right. She cannot hear a thing. Hazel taught her with her hands. He raised one hand level with his shoulder, opened it and turned it palm down, and Tuesday, with her back still to him, got up and came and sat down beside his boot. Shadow, he said, when Sylvie asked.
Son is by Fion.
She watches my hand on the ground. Took Hazel 3 months to teach her that. And Sylvie understood right then why the whole county believed this place was haunted. For 3 years people had driven past at night and seen a large, silent animal moving in the dark of an abandoned building, an animal that never barked, never ran off, never reacted when anybody yelled at it. They saw a light burning in a row of rooms with no electric service. They put those 2 things together and made a story, because that is what people do. We would rather believe in a ghost than admit that somebody loved a place so carefully that it kept running after they died. Before he left, Coy Whitaker set down 2 5-gallon jugs of water, a flashlight, a coil of rope, and a box of nails, and told her not to drink out of the spigot behind the building, because that line went in the ground in '61. Sylvie said, I cannot pay you for any of this, and he shut the tailgate and said, You have not heard me ask. Then he sat a moment with his hands on the wheel as if weighing something, and finally said, I better tell you one thing before it scares you. There is somebody living out there. He tipped his chin toward the little mechanical room behind Unit 9, where the pump and the water heater lived. Boy named Rye. He will not hurt anybody. He has been in there since before Hazel passed. I run food out to him once a week, but he does not care to talk. 19 years old. And then he said something she would not fully understand for another 2 weeks. Do not run him off in a hurry. He is the one making that bed. It took 3 days to get a word out of Rye Castile. He was not hiding, which was the strange part. He simply stayed at a fixed distance, the way an animal that has gotten used to people stays without having decided anything about them. Every morning she found evidence of him before she found him. Pulled weeds stacked neatly at the corner of the lot. The plywood on the office window re-nailed. The storm drain pried up and cleaned of leaves. On the 3rd afternoon she was fighting the water valve out by the road when she heard something behind her, and he was standing 4 steps off with a pipe wrench. Thin and tall, hair clipped short with clippers at home, gray shirt, jeans marked with motor oil, not looking at her face but at the valve. You are turning it the wrong way, he said. That is a gate valve. It opens left. The first time they really talked was the following evening, when Sylvie set half a container of pasta down on the step of the mechanical room, then went and sat on the walkway 3 doors away with her back turned and ate her own. After 10 minutes she heard the door open, and then he sat down at the far end of the walkway, maybe 15 feet off, and ate. And they ate like that, not looking at each other, in the wind. Then he said, What are you going to do with this place? Sylvie said she did not know. She had had it 4 days. He said, People are going to tell you to knock it down. And she said, People already have. He scraped the fork around the bottom of the container and said, My mother gets out in October. And just like that, with no run-up, he told it, the way a person tells who is very rarely asked anything, too fast at the start and then jammed in the middle. His mother was Charlene Castile, in her 7th year at a women's unit an hour and a half from here. His father he did not know. He lived with his grandmother until he was 15 and she died, then went into the foster system, then ran from it at 16. And hitched here because this was the only address he could remember in the world, because for 3 years he and his grandmother had slept here once a month. Hazel spotted him from the office before he was halfway across the lot. She did not ask whether he had run. She did not promise not to call anybody, and she did not promise that she would. She said, Go wash your face and come eat. And she opened the mechanical room and told him it was warmer in there than the units because of the water heater. She made me work, Rye said, every day. She said a person only keeps his self-respect if he has got something to do properly. He was with her not quite a year. He learned to weld, to run pipe, to patch tin, to clear a line, and she taught him to drive her old pickup on the dirt road out back and made him go get a license. Then she got sick in August and died in September. Sylvie asked why he had not left. He was quiet so long she thought he was not going to answer. Then he said, "Because my mother gets out in October, and this address is the only one she has got." He kept going, flat, like reading a list. "If she comes out and gets here and this place is shut and dark, she is going to figure nobody is waiting. A person who thinks that is done inside 48 hours. Hazel told me that. The first 48 hours decides it. Somebody picks you up, you live. Nobody picks you up, you go back to whatever picked you up last time." Sylvie asked about the bed in Unit 9, and Rye Castile, 19 years old, sitting in the dark at the far end of a walkway, said, "I make it once a week. Hazel told me to keep that room ready. She said somebody is expected." Sylvie asked who, and he said, "I asked." She would not say. That is all she ever said. Somebody is expected. Sylvie did not sleep that night. She lay listening to the timer turning its slow circle out in the shed, a tick so small she may have been imagining it, and thought about a 79-year-old woman, dying in a county hospital, who still had it in her to tell a 17-year-old boy to keep a bed made. The next morning she started cleaning the office. And that is when she found the first thing. In the top drawer of the counter, among pens printed with an insurance company's name and a stack of unused 3-part carbon receipts, was a hardbound guest register in wine red with a cloth spine, the kind small lodging houses use for guests to sign at check-in. She carried it out to the step to read in the light. It was very tidy, every page ruled into columns. Date, guest name, vehicle plate, unit, nights, amount. The handwriting belonged to an older person taught to write the old way, letters slanting evenly and rounded, and every figure in the money column was the same to the point of monotony. $34, $34, $68, $34. The last entry was August of 4 years ago, and the book was only about 2/3 used. She sat with it open on her knees, and felt a strange dropping sensation she could not account for right away. Then she saw it. She turned back to April 8 years ago, a month she remembered clearly because she had been 10 and had run a fever the whole ride and thrown up on the floor of the bus. April 18th. On that night the Bluebonnet Court had exactly one guest, a man named Dale Hudo, Oklahoma plates, Unit 3, one night, $34. No Marva Grady, no Sylvie Grady, no Unit 9. She had slept here 41 nights. She had a stack of bus stubs and a cookie tin to prove it. She remembered the drinking glass upside down on the paper coaster. And according to the paperwork, she had never been here. There are 2 ways to explain that. The first is that her memory was wrong. The second is that this book was not the truth. And Sylvie Grady, 18 years old, daughter of a woman doing time and granddaughter of a woman who had taught her that the fine print is where people hide the truth, sat on that step and began to understand that some books are written to be read by other people, and some books are written for an entirely different reason. If this one was the book for the inspector, for the tax office, for anybody with authority to walk in and ask, then somewhere there had to be a second one. Before we go any further, if stories like this one mean something to you, take a second to hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now let us get back to Sylvie, because what she is about to find behind that plywood counter is the part I have been waiting to tell you. It took her 2 days. On the afternoon of the 2nd, Rye Castile came in, watched her pulling the counter away from the wall and said, "What are you looking for?" Sylvie said, "Another book." He did not ask why. He knelt down behind the counter and said, "The bottom drawer is shorter than the 2 above it." "I know, because I used to keep screwdrivers in there, and they were always catchings." She pulled the bottom drawer off its runners and set it on the counter and measured it with the span of her hand, and then measured the empty cavity in the body of the counter, and the drawer was a hand's width shorter than the hole. She turned it over. The bottom was thin plywood, and along the back edge, under pale green shelf paper gone bubbly with age, there was a groove no wider than a fingernail. Rye handed her a utility knife. She worked the blade in and pried, and the false bottom came up with a dry crack. Underneath, fitted exactly into the space, were 3 things. A large hardbound book with a spiral binding, the cover a faded green, and on the cover a strip of cloth tape gone brown with 2 words on it in marker. Bus book, a thin wooden cigar box with a sliding lid and a 1-pound coffee tin with a red plastic lid. Sylvie sat down on the concrete with her back against the counter and opened the green book first. The first page was dated the 11th of February, 31 years ago, in the same evenly slanted rounded hand as the red book, except here it moved faster and easier, and here and there the ink went dark, where the writer had stopped and pressed down. It was not ruled by money, it was ruled by the bus. Date, run. Who got off? Unit, took. And in that last column on nearly every line, the figure had been struck through with one decisive stroke, and beside the strike was handwriting. Took nothing. Took nothing, 2 little ones and an empty purse. Took nothing, paid in 2 dozen eggs, which I accepted because she needed to pay something. Took nothing, this one will be back next month, and the month after, do not ever make her ask. Took $3, she insisted, so I took 3 so she could rest easy. She turned the page, and another, and another. The book ran 300 pages, and it was full front to back. 31 years, every Tuesday and every Saturday, the 2 visitation days at Callaway, and the ordinary days in between when somebody walked out the gate with nobody there to meet them. Sylvie read in the light, failing through the broken window, and the size of it rose around her slowly like water. This was not a dozen people, it was not 100, it was thousands of lines, and every line was a human being with a name who had stepped off a bus at a crossroads in the middle of cotton country at 4:40 in the morning and been put into a room. November 28th, no run. Mr. DeWitt Sams came out the gate at 9 in the morning, nobody came, stood on the road 4 hours. Unit 5, 3 nights. Took, struck through, nothing. Note called his sister in Abilene, she will come Friday. 3 days is 3 days. Do not leave a man standing in the sun while his people make up their minds. On page 162 she found her grandmother's name, November 17th, run 47. Mrs. Marva Grady, with granddaughter, girl Pulpsk, first visit, daughter just came in. Unit 9, took $34. The 34 was not struck through. Her grandmother had paid in full that first time. And underneath in the same hand, squeezed into the margin in a different ink, as if added days later, was this. She paid with a 20 and 14 ones and counted it out twice. She has not eaten since morning. This will be the last time she pays anything in this place, but I am not going to tell her that. Sylvie read that sentence 3 times, then she turned the page. December 15th, Mrs. Grady and the Little Bird, Unit 9, struck through, and beside it 2 words. Church rate. January, church rate. March, April, May, 41 times. She counted, folding a small corner on each one, then counting again from the start because she did not trust her own eyes. 41 lines spread across 12 years, every one of them Unit 9, every one with the figure struck through, and beside every strike the same 2 words. There was no such rate. Sylvie knew that immediately, and she knew exactly why those words existed. Hazel Bramlett had invented a price that did not exist so that a 70-year-old woman could take it with her head up, because she knew that if she said the word free, Marva Grady would never come back a second time. There were only 41, because they only had to stay the night before when the prison assigned them the 8 o'clock session. And the unit rotated sessions by inmate number, so it fell that way about 1 visit in 3. The rest of the time they rode in and rode out the same day, and her grandmother did not sleep at all. 12 years, 41 nights, and her grandmother had believed she was getting a charity rate from a church, and had told story with the pride of a woman who knows how to manage. And beside the 27th line, in March of the year Sylvie turned 9, there was an extra note. The girl reads the whole way, her grandmother says. Tomorrow get Denny's bird book out of the closet for her, it is only sitting there. Sylvie put the book down on the floor. She remembered that book. Hardbound, the spine gone, a book about the birds of North America with watercolor plates, and she had carried it on every bus trip for 6 years until it came apart in her hands. And she still had the last 3 pages tucked inside her own notebook in the duffel, in Unit 250 feet from where she was sitting. She had always believed her grandmother bought it at a flea market. She sat on the cold concrete in the falling dark and cried, without noise, both hands over her face. Not out of self-pity. She had had 12 years to get used to self-pity and had used up her whole allowance of it long ago. She cried about something else, something she had never had a name for until that minute. Her entire childhood she had believed she was the burden of a tired old woman and an empty chair across a plastic table. She had believed she was the kind of child the world puts up with, rather than the kind the world gets ready for. And here, in a motel she had bought for $23, she was holding proof, in black ink, that for all 12 of those years, every single month, a woman whose name she had never asked had made up a room and invented a fake price so that Sylvie would have somewhere to sleep. She had not been put up with, she had been expected. Tuesday came in at some point without a sound, the way she came in everywhere, and lay down against Sylvie's legs, and Sylvie bent over the gray head of that deaf old dog and cried into her coat until it was full dark. The cigar box held cards, several hundred of them laminated business card size, gone yellow at the edges, a bluebonnet printed on the front and a few typed lines. Bluebonnet Court, FM 118, Tooele, Texas, across from the main gate. If you come out and nobody is there for you, call this number. Somebody answers. First night is not charged, no questions asked. Below that, a 7-digit number with an area code. Sylvie carried one card across the weeds to the rusted aluminum booth at the corner of the lot and shone the flashlight on the little plate the phone company glues to the housing, where they print the number of the phone itself. The two numbers matched. She lifted the handset and put it to her ear, not really expecting anything, and there was a dial tone. She stood dead still in a dark lot with a handset against her ear, and the steady hum of a living line running into her head. Coy Whitaker called a woman he knew at the exchange up at the county seat, and 3 days later the answer came back, explained in the tired voice of a person who has explained it too many times. The booth was covered by a payphone service agreement signed in '94, tied to the mailing address of the Bluebonnet Court, and when Mrs. Bramlett died, there was nobody to pay it, nobody to cancel it, and nobody who cared enough to disconnect it. In thin rural country, these public lines are kept up under universal service obligations, and the cost of leaving one standing is so close to nothing that they sit in the system for years until somebody complains or somebody audits the assets. Nobody complained, nobody audited, which is to say the phone still rang because the system had forgotten it. Emergency calls out. Yes, the woman said, anything else needs coins. But calls coming in work all day long, honey. Calls coming in do not cost anybody a thing. On Sylvie's 11th night at the Bluebonnet Court at 1 in the morning, the phone rang. The sound of a payphone ringing in open country at 1 in the morning is something she would never forget. It is not like a telephone in a house. It is a mechanical bell, 2 small hammers striking 2 brass cups inside a metal box, and out in the open like that it carries a long way and it sounds like an alarm. She went out barefoot across the weeds while the bell rang, 11 times. 12 the way a bell rings when the person on the other end has nowhere else to call. She picked up and said hello, and her voice came out cracked. On the other end there was breathing, then a truck going by somewhere far off, then a man's voice, low and slow and careful as a person walking on thin ice, asking, "Is Miss Hazel there?" Sylvie stood under the West Texas stars and did not know how to answer. She said she passed, sir, 3 years ago. There was a silence so long she thought the line had dropped. Then the man said, "Ah," and then he said, "Sorry to bother you." And that voice had already begun to retreat, had already begun preparing itself to hang up and stand alone wherever he was standing. Sylvie heard that in his voice, and she heard it clearly, because she had stood in the Hollis Flat bus station counting her money 3 times. She said, "Wait." She said, "Where are you right now?" His name was Wendell Pike, 58 years old, and he was sitting on a concrete step 42 miles east with a mesh bag, a manila envelope, and the $27 the state gives you when you walk out the gate, which he had done at 7 that morning after 16 years. He had gotten a ride the first 30 miles from a man hauling hay, and had walked the last 12. He had nobody to call. Folded in 4 in his wallet, worn through at all 4 creases, was a laminated card with a blue bonnet on it that a woman had pressed into his hand in the visitation room 11 years earlier, when she came to see somebody else, and he happened to be at the next table. "I kept it because she told me to keep it," he said. She said, "You hold on to that, you may not need it, but hold it so I can rest easy." Sylvie asked if he could see Highway 118 and told him to walk west, and to keep walking until he saw a light. Then she hung up, ran to the shed, and did the thing she would always afterward count as the first act at that place that truly belonged to her. She opened the face of the mechanical timer, pulled 18 more red pins out of the rim, and pushed them into the arc between 1 in the morning and 4. The porch light over Unit 9 came on. He walked in a little before 4. At the edge of the pavement, he stopped and looked at the amber bulb burning under its aluminum cone and could not make himself come any farther. And Sylvie had to go out and bring him in. She gave him water and the last of her own food and a plastic basin for his feet. And Rye Castile produced a roll of gauze from the mechanical room without being asked, and nobody asked Wendell Pike what he had done 16 years ago. He stayed 9 days and cleaned out the drainage ditch behind the row because he was not used to sitting still. And on the 9th day, his sister drove down from Ardmore and was crying before she got the car door open. Before he left, he stood in the lot with his cap in his hands and said, "You know what the hardest part of the first day is? It is not being broke. It is that every person looks at you like you are still in there." Miss Hazel was the first one in 16 years who looked at me like a tired man. She opened the coffee tin last, because she knew without being able to say why that it was the most private of the 3. There was money in it, but not the kind a person hopes for, a roll of small bills held with a rubber band, mostly 1s and 5s, $2,118, and wrapped around the roll a square of graph paper in that same round slanted hand. Bus fare money. Do not spend it on anything else. Give what covers the ticket and 1 meal, no more, because more turns into charity and then they do not come back. Under the roll were 9 small pale green slips, soft as cloth from being folded and unfolded. Visitation confirmations. Visitor, Hazel Bramlett. Inmate, Dennis Ray Bramlett. Relationship, mother. Facility, a name Sylvie had never heard of, 600 miles southeast. 9 slips across 14 years. And underneath them, folded in half, a letter from Hazel written to nobody, or to whoever opened the tin. My son was named Denny. He was arrested at 19 along with 2 others for something he took part in. I am not writing that he was innocent, because he was not, and I quit lying to myself about that a long time ago. He got 15 years. They moved him 600 miles because the system was full that year, and nobody asked anybody how far 600 miles is for a woman working nights at a cannery. One visit cost me 2 days of wages, the gas and a night in a motel, $40-some. I was making $2.15 an hour. In the 14 years he was inside, I got to him 9 times. 9. I am writing the number down because I want it to live somewhere besides my own head. He never held it against me, and that is the part that keeps me awake. He wrote and said, "Mama, do not come, it costs too much, I am fine." He wrote that for 14 years, and I let him. On the 19th of April, I got a letter saying he had 3 weeks left. He said he would come home on the bus, and he asked whether I would mind if he stayed a while. He asked me whether I would mind. I made his room up that same day. I washed the sheets and hung them in the sun so they would smell right, and I made the bed. On the 30th of April, they called me. His heart. He was 33. They said it happened fast, and he did not suffer. And I do not know if they said that because it was true or because they have to say something. I never unmade that bed. I sold the house that fall, and I bought this place because it sits across from the main gate, and the price was exactly the money I had. I did not buy it to run a business. I bought it so that no mother ever gets off a bus at this crossroads and has to turn around because there is no place to sleep. If somebody is reading this, there is only one thing I want to say. Do not make people ask. They have already asked everywhere else. And keep a bed in 9. There may not be anybody coming. Make it anyway. Sylvie sat a long time with that page in her hand. Then she took the keys, walked to the end of the row, and opened Unit 9 and stood in the doorway, looking at the tight white sheet, the blanket folded in a straight line, the drinking glass upside down on its coaster. 31 years. A woman had made a bed for a son who was never coming, and then she had turned that bed into something else. She had taken the most meaningless act of her life and repeated it every week until it became a promise to strangers. Somebody is expected. Sylvie understood then that the sentence was not a prophecy, and it was not a grieving mother refusing the facts. It was an operating instruction. It meant get ready anyway, even when the lot is empty, even when nobody comes for 3 weeks running, because the day you stop getting ready is the day the person who needs it arrives and finds a locked door. On the visitation Saturday of that month, she got up at 5, washed in cold water, put on the one clean shirt she owned, and walked across the road. She had crossed that road 141 times in her life, but always beside her grandmother, always with the feeling of a child being led. She went alone, stood in line alone, signed the book alone, sat down in the beige plastic chair alone. Her mother came through the door and stopped when she saw only one person at the table. Lynette Grady was 41. Her hair pulled back, gray at her temple that had not been there last month, or that Sylvie had never looked closely enough to see. She put both hands flat on the table the way the rules require, and she looked at her daughter, and she knew instantly. She said, "Where is Mama?" Sylvie told her. Then the two of them sat in the noise of that room, the vending machine, a child crying at the next table, a young officer walking back and forth. Lynette Grady cried without a sound for nearly 3 minutes, with her hands still flat because she was not allowed to lift them to her face. And Sylvie sat across from her, not allowed to touch her. And it was one of the cruelest things her daughter had ever watched. When she could speak, she asked where Sylvie was living, and Sylvie said, "I bought the motel across the road." Her mother looked at her as if she had spoken a foreign language, so Sylvie told her. $23, the laughter on the courthouse steps, the deaf dog, the light at 440, Rye Wendell Pike, the green book, and the 41 lines with 2 words written beside the crossed-out figure. And there, in the middle of the sentence, Lynette Grady made a sound like a laugh, breaking in half, and put her face down on the table, which is against the rules. And the young officer looked over and then deliberately looked away. My mother bragged about that, she said. For 12 years, she would say, "Lynette, I found a church that covers the room for folks like us, aren't I something?" What? She lifted her head, her face a wreck, and said the thing Sylvie would carry the rest of her life. My mother died believing she took care of that girl by herself. Do not you ever let anybody at her funeral say she did not. She did take care of you. She just got helped along and never knew it. Those are 2 different things. Before the hour ended, her mother asked what she meant to do with the place. And Sylvie said, "Open it back up." Her mother looked at her a long moment and said, "Listen to me. Somebody is going to come tell you to sell. Land across from a prison gate always has somebody coming to tell you to sell. You ask them one question. Ask them what they mean to build." The white pickup came the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning, the kind of truck people out here call a city truck. Not because it is expensive, but because it is clean. No red mud up the flank, no scratch on the bed rail, the tread still full across the middle. The man who got out was about 44, shirt buttoned at the cuffs, flat-soled dress shoes crossing the sand without breaking stride. The walk of a man who has walked over a lot of ground he never intended to stay on. He put his hand out and said his name was Preston Fain. He represented a company that developed logistics services around correctional facilities, and he used that exact phrase 3 times in the first 5 minutes. Then he explained, and he explained it well, because that was his job. The Callaway unit takes about 40,000 visits a year. Most come by bus or by car. They come early because they are afraid of being late. They wait on average an hour and 40 minutes outside in a lot with no shade. They have nowhere to store belongings because belongings cannot go inside. Nowhere to change though the dress code is strict. Nowhere to nurse a baby. No restroom until they clear the gate. "Have you ever seen that?" he asked. And Sylvie said, "I have stood in it 41 times. Preston Fain nodded, and he nodded sincerely, which was the part she found hardest to take. "Then you understand why this ground is worth something," he said. "A visitor services building. Covered, air-conditioned, lockers, changing rooms, chairs for the elderly, vending, a shuttle from the lot to the gate." He let a beat go by. Priced, of course, $8 to park, $5 for a locker, $3 a ride on the shuttle. It has to be, because nobody ever built anything out of good intentions. Then he took a sheet of paper out of his case, laid it on the hood, wrote a figure with a fountain pen and turned it toward her. $46,500. Cash. Closing in 30 days. Sylvie looked at that number a long time. She was 18 and she had $111 in her pocket, a motel with no power and a tin roof with 3 holes in it. $46,500 was 3 years of rent somewhere. It was 2 years of community college. It was a used car that ran, and a bank balance, and a life that did not require counting money 3 times in a bus station. Preston Fain stood still and let the number do its own work, because that was his job too. Sylvie remembered what her mother told her. She asked, "Where do the people who come in on the 440 bus sleep?" He said, "I am sorry, I do not follow." She said, "Route 47 gets to this crossroads at 440. The visitation gate opens at 7:30. Where do they sleep in those 3 hours? He said, our model does not include overnight lodging. And Sylvie said, then your model does not include my grandmother. He did not get angry. Men like that do not get angry. They turned to the next page in the file. He put the paper back in his case and told her 3 things in exactly the same pleasant voice. First, her tax deed carried 180 days of redemption, and any lawful heir could come forward, pay the statutory amount, and take the property back. And his company had engaged a genealogy firm to search the Bramlett line nationwide. He said that part very gently, like a helpful tip. Second, the structures had been red-tagged before she ever bought them. No certificate of occupancy, no compliant wastewater system, bad roof, old wiring. And the moment she let a stranger sleep in, one of them, she was operating an unpermitted lodging house, which gave the Board of Supervisors every ground it needed to clear the parcel as a public hazard. Third, he said, and here he smiled slightly, you are 18. You will owe property tax, a reconnection fee, permits, and liability insurance. Do you have any idea what liability insurance runs on a lodging property? Sylvie said no. He said, I know. That is exactly the problem. Then he got in his truck and drove off slowly without raising dust. The lawyer's letter came Thursday, certified, signed for at the grocery because the Bluebonnet court had no mailbox. The substance was simple. Fain's company would petition the Rell County Board of Supervisors to review the sale of Lot 14 on the ground that the parcel should have been held for commercial rezoning under the master plan, and would ask the county to enforce the demolition order on the unsafe structures. A public hearing on the 4th Tuesday of the month at 7 in the evening. Sylvie sat on the office step and counted the days. 32. Rye Castile read it over her shoulder and said nothing for a long while. And then he said, my mother gets out on October 11th, and he did not need to say anything else. She went inside and looked at what was on the counter, the green book, the cigar box, and in the file cabinet, under 2 folders of water bills, a shoebox she had found in her 3rd week with 211 letters in it, written on everything. Graph paper torn from school notebooks, the backs of grocery receipts, a Christmas card that shed Teg glitter over the floor when she opened it, coming from more than 20 states across 30 years, and nearly all of them beginning the same way, the way people write when they are not sure they were ever remembered. You probably do not remember me. One man wrote in awkward capitals that he came out in 2004, that he stood outside the gate and had made up his mind to do something stupid, and that the light across the road was the only reason he crossed the road instead of walking the other way. He wrote, I have driven a truck 20 years since. Every night I run that stretch, I hit the horn twice. 7 of the letters had arrived after Hazel died, because the post office did not know, and because the people who wrote them did not know either. Sylvie sat looking at that shoebox, and a thought came together in her head, slow and clear as sunrise on flat country. Not one of these people knows she is gone, and not one of them knows this place is 32 days from being scraped off the ground. Every letter had an envelope. Every envelope had a return address. Coy Whitaker came the next morning and found 2 young people sitting on the office floor between fans of spread-out envelopes. And when Sylvie explained, he stood in the doorway looking down at the pile a while, then took off his cap, set it on the counter, pulled up the folding chair and said, give me a pen. They wrote for 4 days. Sylvie wrote every letter by hand because she had no printer, and because she believed, correctly, that a typed letter gets thrown away and a handwritten one does not. She wrote it once and copied it 198 times. That Hazel Bramlett had died 3 years ago of pneumonia, and that 7 people came to the funeral. That she now owned the Bluebonnet court, that she was 18, that she had bought it for $23, and that she had slept in Unit 941 nights as a child without ever knowing she was staying free. That a company wanted to clear the property for a paid parking lot, and that a hearing would be held at 7 in the evening on the 4th Tuesday at the Rell County Courthouse. And she closed every one of them with a single sentence. If she ever left a light on for you, I need you to come stand up and say so. 13 came back undeliverable. Coy Whitaker paid for the stamps out of his own pocket, and when Sylvie objected, he said, hush, I hauled people for 38 years and never did one useful thing. 4 days went by and nothing. On the 5th evening, the payphone rang, and the voice was a woman's, quick and sharp, and it did not bother with hello. Is it true, she said, that she is gone? Sylvie said, "Yes, ma'am, 3 years ago." And there was a breath let out on the other end, the breath of a person who has just had something taken that they assumed was still there. "My name is Yvette Sandoval," the woman said. "When I was 19, I had my first baby at 34 weeks, and 4 months later I got on Route 47 to take him to see his father, and I ran out of money in Amarillo. I got to that crossroads at 4 in the morning with a newborn and $8. She gave me 3 nights, and she washed every dupper I had. I am 46 now. I am a hospice nurse in Lubbock. That baby is a dialysis technician." Then she said, "Read me that date again." Yvette Sandoval drove down that Saturday with a folding table, 2 sleeves of paper cups, and a 5-gallon coffee urn. She read the first line of the green book her eyes landed on, sat down in the folding chair and cried about 2 minutes with one hand over her eyes, and when she took the hand away, she was finished and did not cry again. "All right," she said. "Sit down. You are 18, and you think you are asking these people for a favor. You are wrong. You are handing 200 people the thing they have been waiting 20 years for, which is a chance to pay her back. You open the door and step out of the way and watch." Over the next 11 days, more people came to the Bluebonnet court than had come in the previous 3 years together. They came in 1s and 2s, a pickup with New Mexico plates, a church van with 9 people from the next county, a man on a motorcycle from Colorado, past 60, who brought a tool bag and said nothing all morning except to ask who had put that roof on. They had not come for the hearing, which was still 2 weeks off. They came because they did not know what else to do with the news they had been handed, and because they were there, they started working. Nobody slept in the rooms. Sylvie would not allow it because the buildings had not passed inspection, and she was not going to hand Preston Fain the one thing he had actually been right about. So people slept in campers and truck beds, and on the floor of the chapel down the road. The woman who found her 6 days before the hearing was not in the shoebox. She drove an old sedan, wore flat shoes, had short white hair, and stood in the office door leaning on an aluminum cane. "I am Ines Petit," she said. "I practiced law in this county 41 years, and I have been retired 6. I read your letter. You did not send it to me. My cousin over in Odessa got one and read it to me on the telephone." She came in and her eyes stopped on the felt board with its 24 timetables pinned in even rows, and she said, "Good Lord, she still had those up." Then she sat down, leaned the cane against the counter, and said, "I believe I have got what you need. But first you are going to tell me every word that man in the white truck said to you." Sylvie told her. Ines Petit listened all the way through without interrupting, hands folded in her lap, and when it was finished, she sat quiet about half a minute. Then she said, "In '98 a motel chain wanted to buy this ground. They offered Hazel 4 times what it was worth. She came to my office and asked me a question nobody had asked me in 41 years of practice. She asked me, 'Miss Eanes, what do I have to do so that after I am dead, nobody can turn this into something else?' Before we go any further, if this story is meaning something to you, take 1 second to hit subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Because what this old country lawyer is about to take out of her briefcase is something Hazel Bramlett prepared 24 years ago, for a day she knew perfectly well was coming. Now back to Sylvie. Ines Petit drew out a set of papers held with a butterfly clip, a certified copy from the Rell County Clerk's office, file number, volume, page, recorded the 19th of June '98. "Do you know what a restrictive covenant is?" she asked, and Sylvie said no. And the old lawyer explained it slowly in the voice of a woman who has explained this to a great many people sitting on the other side of a desk. "When a person buys a piece of land," she said, "they do not just buy dirt. They buy everything that has been recorded against that dirt. Some of what is recorded binds only the person who signed it, and when that person dies, it dies with them. But there is a particular kind of promise which, if it is drafted correctly and recorded correctly, and if it benefits another specific piece of land nearby, attaches to the ground itself instead of to a person. We say it runs with the land. Whoever buys it takes it. Sell it 10 times, it is still there. A buyer cannot say he did not know, because it sits in the public records at the courthouse. And anybody buying land has a duty to look." She put her hand flat on the papers. "In '98, Hazel Bramlett paid me $300 to draft this. And I tried to give her the money back because it was so simple I was embarrassed." Then she read it out. Paragraph 1. "The property shall be used only for overnight lodging, and shall not be used as a fee parking facility, a per-use fee service facility, or any commercial operation that does not include a place to sleep. Paragraph 2. The nightly charge to family members of persons confined at the correctional facility opposite shall not exceed 1/4 of the average room rate of lodging establishments within 30 miles. Paragraph 3. The owner shall not refuse lodging on the ground that the person seeking it cannot pay, so long as a room stands vacant. Paragraph 4. These covenants run with the land and bind every successor owner, regardless of how title passes, including transfer by tax sale or judicial proceeding. Paragraph 5. These covenants are for the benefit of the adjoining 2 acres to the south, owned by Crossroads Chapel of Tooele, Texas, and are enforceable by that owner and its successors. She folded the papers shut and asked whether Sylvie understood it, and Sylvie said she was not sure. Then I will put it plainly, Ines Podete said. That man can buy this ground from you. He can pay you $46,500 or $100,000, and he can get the deed. But the day he pours concrete for a paid parking lot, the preacher at that little tin-roofed church 400 yards up the road walks into court, and the court makes him tear it out. This was recorded 24 years ago. It is not going anywhere. She tapped a finger on the counter. Do you understand what she did? She was not trying to save a motel. Motels fall down. She saved the use of the land. She made this ground worthless to exactly the kind of man she knew was coming. The Rell County boardroom seats 90. On the 4th Tuesday, there were 130 people inside it, standing along both walls, another 90 in the hallway, and cars parked down both sides of Main for 4 blocks. Plates from 9 states. Sylvie got there at 6 and watched people come in and did not recognize a single one of them. And that was the part that made her lightheaded. 200 people she had never met, each one carrying a handwritten letter from her or a photocopy of one. Because it turned out people had copied them and passed them around. Yvette Sandoval stood at the door writing down names. Coy Whitaker wore the only suit jacket he owned and kept pulling at the cuffs. Ry Castile stood against the wall in the corner and did not sit down, because he does not sit down in crowded rooms. And in the 3rd row from the front alone sat a woman past 60, with dyed blonde hair that nobody could identify. The chairman was a man named Ronnie Dietz, who sold farm supply and had held the seat 17 years. And when he walked in and saw the room, he stopped for a step in the doorway. Sylvie saw that half step and understood that some part of this was already decided before it started. The company's lawyer went first and spoke for 14 minutes about public safety, about substandard wiring, about the county's exposure if somebody got hurt in a red-tagged building, and he put up 3 photographs of the failed roof taken the month before a retired roofer from Colorado closed it. Preston Fain sat in the front row and said nothing. He did not have to. He paid a man to say it. Then Dietz asked whether anyone wished to be heard from the public, and Yvette Sandoval stood up where she was, half turned toward the board, and said, "Before you knock it down, you might want to know what it is you are knocking down." Then she sat, and a man in the 9th row stood up. "My name is DeWitt Sams. In '96, I came out the Callaway Gate at 9 in the morning, and I stood on that road 4 hours because my sister did not come. Hazel Bramlett gave me 3 nights and took nothing, and she called my sister for me. I am 68 years old. I never came back here once. I drove from Shreveport tonight." He sat down. A woman in the 4th row stood. "My name is Sherilyn Boyce. In the winter of '97, I slept in Unit 2 with my 2 children. My oldest daughter is sitting right here." And the woman beside her, about 35, in scrubs because she had come straight off shift, stood up too. Then another. Then another. Nobody had organized it and nobody had set an order. It simply happened that way, one at a time, all over that room, and each person said nearly the same thing in their own words: a name, a year, a room number, and 1 sentence about what happened afterward. Unit 6, 2002, my boy broke out with measles. Unit 489, I was 17 and I was pregnant. Unit 7, 2009, I drive a truck and I hit the horn twice every night I run that stretch. Unit 9, November, the girl reads the whole way. That last one came from Bernice, 68 years old, in the back row, and she added, I rode that bus with Marva Grady a few times. I remember the child. She never once looked up out of her book. Sylvie had to look at the floor for a while. It went on for 42 minutes. Dietz did not cut anybody off, although public comment is 3 minutes a speaker. and by the 15th person he had put the timer face down on the table. The company's lawyer stood twice to object that none of this bore on structural safety, and both times Dietz said, "Sit down, sir." And then Ellis Mabry stood up, holding his cap, and said, "I worked 29 years at Callaway and I retired a sergeant," and the room went entirely still. "I stood at that gate every morning, and I watched people get off the bus at 4:40, he said. "I watched old women sit on the shoulder for 3 hours. Some days it was 105 degrees. Some days it was ice, and I watched that light across the road." He turned his cap once in his hands. "You all think those two things have nothing to do with public safety. I did that job 29 years, so let me tell you. What makes a prison less dangerous is not the fence. It is a man knowing there is somebody on the outside still willing to come see him. A man who still gets visits you can hold. A man who quits getting visits you cannot. That motel is the reason half the men in there still get visits." He sat down. Nobody applauded, because it was not that kind of room, but something moved through it, and Sylvie felt it on her skin. Then Dietz asked whether Miss Grady wished to say anything, and Sylvie stood up and held the green book in both hands, because her hands were shaking. "I am 18 years old, and I bought that place for $23, she said, "and I know everybody in here figures I bought it because I had nowhere to go." "That is exactly right. 3 weeks ago I found this book. My name is in it 41 times. Then she read the line from November 12 years back and the notes squeezed into the margin. She paid with a 20 and 14 ones and counted it out twice. She has not eaten since morning. This will be the last time she pays anything in this place, but I am not going to tell her that." Then she read the next 4 lines, and every one of them ended with the same 2 words. "Church rate." She looked up. "There is no such rate," she said. "She made it up so my grandmother could take it without feeling small. My grandmother died in March. She died still believing she took care of me by herself for 12 years, and she did. She just got helped along and never knew it." Then she closed the book and said, "I did not come here to ask you to let me keep a motel. I came to tell you that the thing you are about to red tag and push into a pile is the only thing on this stretch of road that never once made anybody ask." Ines Poteet went to the podium after that and asked leave to enter a document into the record. "Mr. Chairman, I practiced in this county 41 years and my license is current. This instrument was recorded with the Rell County Clerk on the 19th of June, 98, Volume 241, page 118. It sits in the chain of title of Lot 14. I do not believe the county or the petitioner has troubled to open it." Then she read the 5 paragraphs. Sylvie watched Preston feign while she read, and that is the thing she remembered better than any applause afterward. He did not flinch, he did not color. He simply tipped his head a degree or two to the side, the motion of a man hearing a number and rerunning the whole calculation from the top. At paragraph 4, the one saying the obligations run with the land and bind every successor owner, including a purchaser at tax sale, he reached down for his briefcase. At paragraph 5, the one naming the adjoining church parcel as the benefited land with standing to enforce, he stood up. He did not walk out immediately, because he was far too professional for that. He stood beside his chair, heard the rest, leaned over and said something to his lawyer, then went up the aisle to the door with the untroubled walk of a man stepping out to take a call. He did not come back. The company's lawyer asked for a continuance to study the instrument. Dietz asked whether he had run the chain of title before filing the petition, and the lawyer said they had reviewed a title abstract. "An abstract abstracts," Ines Poteet said. "The original record is on the ground floor of this building, 40 meters from where you are standing, and it has been there 24 years. There was laughter, and Dietz knocked the gavel once, but he was working not to laugh himself. The genealogy search came to nothing in the end. The firm turned up one second cousin in Arizona who was told she could redeem the property with the company's money and keep $25,000 for signing it straight back to them, and who drove 2 days to look at the thing she was being paid to take, and slept 3 nights in her car in that lot, because the buildings had not passed inspection, and Sylvie could not rent her a room, and who went home to Yuma without filing anything. The board voted at 9:40. They did not declare the Bluebonnet Court a landmark, they did not lift the red tag, and they did not give Sylvie $1. Those things do not happen in the real world, and they did not happen here. What they did was stay the demolition order 12 months, with 3 conditions written into the resolution. The owner had to apply for building permits for the roof and the electrical within 60 days. A licensed electrician had to pull the permit for the reconnection, and no person could be lodged there until the buildings passed county inspection. Dietz brought the gavel down and then added one thing off the record. Miss Grady, I grew up in this county. I have driven past that place my whole life, and I never once asked what it was. I believe that is my failing and not yours. Outside, under a June sky, 200 people stood around and nobody would leave. They came to her one at a time and took her hand. A man folded bills into her palm and walked off before she could give them back. A woman gave her a phone number and said, I hang drywall, I will be out Saturday. A man named Rudy said he was a licensed electrician out of Midland and he would pull the permit and would not take pay. And when Sylvie started to argue, he said only, Unit 391, do not argue with me. By 11 at night, Yvette Sandoval had 47 names with trades and telephone numbers. Coy Whitaker found Sylvie at the edge of it, leaning against a lamppost because her legs had quit. You know what is funny, he said. She had 7 people at her funeral. 7. I carried a corner of her, and I remember thinking, this woman lived her whole life and nobody knew a thing about it. He looked out over the packed parking lot. I was off by 216. Rudy Escamilla pulled the electrical permit in his own name and spent 4 weekends rewiring all 9 units because the old wire was aluminum run in the 60s, and he said plainly that if they left it, sooner or later it would burn. And he made Sylvie stand beside him and explain every step back to him, and by the 2nd weekend she could read a circuit diagram and knew why the outlet in a bathroom has to have a ground fault interrupter on it. Money was always short, and that is the part Sylvie never hid from anybody who asked her later. The folded bills came to $3,240. The roll in the coffee tin was $2,118, and she never touched a cent of it, because it already had a name. She took nights at the truck stop 11 miles down the road, 10 to 6, 4 nights a week, and slept in the afternoons, and rye-loaded seed 3 days a week, and they both got thinner that summer. The county inspector came on the 19th of September, walked all 9 rooms in 2.5 hours with a flashlight and a circuit tester, and wrote up 14 violations. They fixed the 14 violations in 10 days. He came back on the 29th and signed the paper on the hood of his own truck. 4 rooms approved, units 2, 3, 5, and 6. 4, not 9, because the real world does not hand you 9 rooms at once. But 4 rooms is 4 rooms. On the 4th of October, the electric company set a new meter, and the first thing Sylvie did was not to turn on a light in a room. She walked out to the foot of the 13-foot blue bonnet sign and closed the breaker. The 5-petal flower did not light, because the tubing inside it had broken years ago and there was no money to have it made. And only the small sign hanging beneath it came on, a green box of neon letters that flickered twice and then held. Vacancy. There were about 30 people there that day and nobody cheered. They stood in the lot and looked up at a word that had been dark for 3 years. 7 days later, on the 11th of October, Rye Castile got up at 4 in the morning and could not go back to sleep. He swept the lot twice and washed the office glass, and at 7 he changed into the shirt Yvette Sandoval had bought him and sat down on the walkway step and did not say one word for 3 hours. There is no direct bus from the women's unit to Thule, so Charlene Castile had to change twice, and she got off at the crossroads at 20 past 11 with a mesh bag and a manila envelope. Sylvie watched through the office glass as a 40-year-old woman stood on the far side of the road with her hand up against the sun, looking at a row of rooms she only had in her head, and saw that the sign was lit even in the middle of the day, because Rye had switched it on at 6 that morning and would not let anybody turn it off. Then she saw her son. Sylvie pulled the curtain shut. Some things are not for watching. That afternoon, Sylvie sat alone behind the counter and turned through 300 pages until she found the last line Hazel Bramlett ever wrote, dated the 9th of August, the handwriting shaky and larger and no longer leaning evenly. No run, I do not feel well. Left the light. Under it were 200 blank pages. Sylvie looked at that blank page a long time. Then she took a pen and wrote, October 11th, no run. Mrs. Charlene Castile, released from Hobbs at 9, traveled by herself 2 changes. Unit 5, took nothing. Her son waited here 3 years and 1 month. And then in the margin, smaller. New keeper of the book, Sylvie Grady, 18. I slept in Unit 941 nights and did not know it. Now I know. The Bluebonnet Court reopened with 4 rooms in the middle of October. The rate was $12 a night for everybody, and nothing for family of anyone confined across the road. And Sylvie hung a small wooden board at the counter with exactly those 2 lines on it, because she wanted the price out in the open instead of sitting inside somebody's pity. There was a glass jar with no label on the counter, and if you could put something in it, you did. And if you could not, you did not. And nobody behind the counter ever looked to see which. Unit 9 was not rented. She kept it exactly as she found it and made it once a week on Tuesdays alone. And on the door she tacked a small card in her own handwriting. This room is not for rent. It is made up for a man named Denny, and for anybody else who is later than they meant to be. People asked, and she told them, and she always finished the same way. Somebody is expected. 3 years after that night, on a cold, clear morning in February, Sylvie drove Coy Whitaker's old pickup to the gate of the Callaway unit at 7:45 and stood out in the lot with her hands in her coat pockets. The gate opened at 8. Her mother came out with a mesh bag and a manila envelope and stopped for a second when the sunlight hit her face. And then she looked across the road, where 9 whitewashed rooms sat under a new roof with 9 blue doors, and the small green box hanging under the flower was lit because Sylvie never turned it off. Vacancy. Lynette Grady crossed FM 118 with her daughter, walking slowly because 15 years is 15 years, and in the lot she stopped and asked which one. Sylvie said, "Number 9. Her mother said, "I thought 9 was not for rent." Sylvie said, "It is not. I made it up yesterday." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Sylvie sat on the office step with the green book on her knees. February in West Texas is cold and the sky is crowded with stars to the point of being unreasonable. Across the road, 2 high lamps threw their light down on an empty prison lot, and on this side the amber bulb over Unit 9 put its circle down on new concrete. The mechanical timer was still out in the shed, even though there was grid power, now, and she never took it out. And every time a storm knocked the power down, that old marine battery still carried exactly 2 bulbs, exactly the way a woman had calculated it more than 20 years earlier, standing at a farm supply counter in Lubbock for 45 minutes. Sylvie wrote the day's line. February 19th. No run. Mrs. Lynette Grady released from Callaway at 8 in the morning. Unit 9. Took nothing. Then she added 3 more words at the end, the same way Hazel Bramlett had added 2 words at the end of 41 lines with her name on them. Somebody came home. A little after 2 in the morning, the payphone at the corner of the lot rang. Sylvie put on her coat and walked out across the lot, and the grit ground under her soles, and the mechanical bell of 2 small brass hammers carried out over dark cotton ground. She picked up the handset. On the other end was the breathing of somebody, standing somewhere, very late, very far off, holding a laminated card with a blue wildflower printed on it. Sylvie Grady, 21 years old, stood under the stars and said the sentence she would go on, saying a few thousand more times in the life that was left to her. Bluebonnet Court. Tell me where you are. I have got the light on. Legacy is not the thing we leave in a safe. Legacy is a $200 timer a woman installed, so a light would keep burning after she died. It is a price invented out of thin air so a 70-year-old woman could keep her dignity. It is 5 paragraphs recorded at a courthouse 24 years early so a stranger could never turn a place of shelter into a place with a turnstile. Legacy is a bed made up for somebody who never came home, and then made up again every week for 31 years for everybody else. We do not get to know who will step off the 440 bus. We only get to decide whether there is a light burning when they do. Make the bed anyway. Somebody is expected.